Hi, welcome to anybody who's watching this video. My name is Laura and I am the Communications and Audience Development Manager for UK New Artists. UK New Artists is a charity that supports artists across any art form from any age over 18 who are within the first 10 years of their practice. And we do that in a number of ways. So that might be artist development, residencies, commissions, and through our city takeovers, which are our kind of showcasing festivals. And I'd like to introduce my co-host for today's talk, Anna, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi everybody, I am Anna Castleton Simmons and I run Arts PR London, which is a small PR agency which does PR for arts, design and culture with an ethical manifesto.
Thank you. Just to give a bit of an introduction to this talk, so today Anna and I are going to talk about building your profile as an artist, so thinking about your brand, I suppose, and how to connect with different organisations, with the press, with other artists, and how to kind of build an online presence and make yourself and your work visible to the world, I suppose. So we have, I suppose, 4 sections to the talk, and just to go over them briefly. The first section is the kind of foundations of building your artist profile, so some kind of basic principles and tips and tricks. Section 2 will be about social media, again with some tips and tricks, some advice for the different platforms. Section 3 is about networking, both in person and online, and how you can kind of connect with different artists and organisations. And then section 4 is press and PR, so some basics of things like creating a press pack and a press release, and where to start with networking and reaching out to the press.
So in terms of branding, I think we've probably all heard the sort of legend of where the word branding came from, and the idea that it was originally shepherds out in their fields with their herds and their flocks, and they would brand their animals as a way to identify which were theirs out in the field. And now I think often when we're thinking of branding, it sounds super corporate often. We're maybe imagining logos or big adverts, and it doesn't necessarily sound like it's something which relates to creative practice. So I just wanted to take a step back and have a think about how it could relate to all of us at any stage in our careers, even if we're just starting out. And essentially for me, it is a way to identify ourselves and to start to think about how we want to present ourselves to the world. And a really good way to do that in the beginning is just to step back, have a look at your practice and your work, and think about what it is that you are really passionate about, what you think is really different about your work that sets you apart from your peers and others in your practice. What it is that you would like to say essentially about your work. And this is just a really exciting chance for you to tell your own story in your own words. So ways that you might use that branding once you've started thinking about what your core elements are that for you encapsulate what your work does and is, might be your artist statement. And you might also use it a little bit in your artist biography. One really nice way of doing things, I think, to make it feel slightly less cringy when you're starting this is once you've had a bit of a chance to think about a few key words or a few key descriptors for how you would describe your work, have a chat maybe to some people who know your work and know you, and ask them how they would describe your work back to you, or if they were talking to a friend, how they would describe your practice. And maybe incorporate those, see if you can refine it a little bit, get it down as short as you can so that you're being really, really clear. And then take that to somebody who's not been working with you on your descriptors and say to them, if you have a look at this, does this look like my work, or does this sound like my work and me and my practice? And get a sense of whether or not you've really captured the essence of your practice and whether it's something that people could really relate to and understand.
think that's a really great piece of advice, because sometimes when you're so close to something like your own practice or your own organisation, your own business, your own company, you understand it so well because it's, it is you. But yeah, it's so good to get an outside perspective, because actually somebody else might not quite kind of get the same meaning as you. So yeah, I think that's a really good tip. Something else that we wanted to mention, which is a really simple one, is setting up a dedicated email address for your artistic practice or your business, rather than having a personal address. I mean, not least because logistically it's easier to kind of have those emails separate from all the kind of newsletters and spam you might have in your personal address, but also just because it's more professional to have an artist email address rather than lauralovescake@hotmail.com or whatever you might have for your personal address. So that's a really easy thing you can do. You can use Gmail or Outlook or any of the email providers, and that'll be free. So next on the list in the foundations for your artist profile is a website. So there's lots of different ways that you might build a website, and you don't need to have loads of coding or technical skills to do this anymore. So you can use these web builder platforms, which are essentially kind of drag and drop website creators, and you can use templates as a starting point, and they have lots of really nice, really stylish, really easy to use templates. So you could use something like Wix or Squarespace, WordPress, which can be like a little bit more complicated, but does also have like templates. There's pros and cons to each of these. On the free end of the scale, I think WordPress is free, but perhaps with like a WordPress branding on the site. Wix, I think, is on the cheaper end of the scale. Squarespace, maybe a little bit more. I think a personal account is like £10 a month, something like that. And there's other ones if you want something a bit more technical. Like there's Webflow, which is perhaps a bit more nuanced, but a bit more expensive. But these are all really, really simple to use, and like I said, varying in price. You'd also need to factor in the cost of your domain, so your URL, like your ukyoungartist.co.uk. You can run a search, like a domain name search, before you decide to build your website, to check if anybody else already has that name for their website, and then you can buy that domain. It's relatively cheap. I think it's like £10 a year or something like that to kind of keep your domain. So that's where you might start.
That sounds absolutely brilliant, and I would agree with all of those as being a really nice foundation, and especially your point that it doesn't need to be anything complicated, especially when you're just setting up. It's definitely better to have something which is good rather than perfect, and make sure that it's up there, especially by the time, for example, you might be graduating and starting to make contacts in the wider world. So some elements that you would probably want to make sure you had on your website to start off with would be your contact information, so people have a way of reaching out to you if they've stumbled across your site and don't already know you. Using it perhaps as a little mini portfolio site, so having some really high quality documentation of your practice, whether that's photos or videos up there. Having a section ideally which is about your latest news, so if you have an exhibition or a performance coming up, or if you're appearing at an expo or a fair, letting people know about it there. It might be nice to also have an email sign-up form and to have links to your social media profiles. And this is also somewhere that you could include your artist statement and your either artist biography or your CV.
And Anna mentioned email sign-ups, so it's worth mentioning that some of the web builder platforms such as Squarespace and Wix, I think WordPress as well, they have inbuilt functionality for email newsletters, so you can design and send out your kind of mailing list newsletters from there, or otherwise you could just use something like MailChimp, and you can get a free account on things like that to send out email updates to subscribers. So the final thing we wanted to mention on the kind of foundations basics is business cards. These feel like a slightly strange thing to talk about in 2020 because they've been mostly redundant this year because we're not allowed to have any contact. But in kind of normal times, they can be quite useful, particularly if you are an artist who might attend like an expo or a fair. You might have a stand at an event. I know that UK artists, when we attend exhibitions or fairs, things like that, we tend to pick up an artist business card if we want to connect with them, on social media, follow their work, send them an opportunity, that kind of thing. So they can be useful. And I guess my advice for making business cards would be to try and make it bespoke to you and your practice. So if you are a musician, for example, you might have a QR code on your business card that takes somebody to your Spotify profile, or if you are quite active on YouTube, if you're a video maker, you might have a QR code that goes to your YouTube profile. If you're a visual artist, a really nice image of your work on the front, or a designer, something that encapsulates your style. So making those really bespoke to you. And they don't need to be, really professionally printed. They could be DIY if that's part of your work, and if that goes with your aesthetic and your practice. They might be handmade or something like that. I just say try and make them stand out and make them personal.
I agree. I think that's a really nice point. It's feedback that we often hear from people who do promo nights or who are curators and things, that if you're going to an event, you'll often pick up tens or hundreds of cards along the way. And it's really fantastic when people have put either a link on there to their work or an image of their work, so that you can instantly remember, oh yes, this was that person, I really loved their piece. So you know which ones you really want to follow back up with.
Okay, so we're moving on to section 2, which is about social media and building up an online presence on social media. So we wanted to start by talking about some of the different platforms and how you might figure out which platform is right for you. I'd start by saying that you don't need to be on every social media platform. You don't need to spread yourself across all of the different things that the internet has to offer. I think it may take a bit of experimentation, but you want to try and find the platform or platforms that are right for you. So for example, if you are an illustrator or a designer, you may find that Pinterest is a really good medium for you to connect with an audience and to share your work. If you are working in other kind of visual mediums like photography or visual arts, or perhaps videography, you might find that Instagram is a really good platform for you to share your work and to connect with your audience. On the other end, if you are a poet or working in writing, you might find that Twitter is a better platform for you to share your work, because it's primarily about words rather than kind of more visual mediums, although you can obviously include photos and videos as well. So just kind of think about where your work sits best and what's the best communication platform for your work, and also think about who your audience is, or who you want your audience to be, and where are those people, where can you find them? Are they on Twitter? Are they on Instagram? Are they on Facebook, which I haven't mentioned, but yeah, I think those are all super valid points, and I totally agree with the fact that you don't need to be across every channel. It's such a lot of work to keep all of those channels going. So one tip I would suggest is, maybe once you've set up profiles on a few of them, you might want to have a look both at the insights that you can see on some of those channels, and also on the insights that you might be getting from your website or Google Analytics if you've set that up for your website. So if you were, for example, looking at Google Analytics, it would tell you how many of the visitors to your website are coming to you through each of the social media platforms. And that can just be a really helpful guide if you're struggling to work out where to invest your time, especially because creating content for a social media channel sometimes takes a little bit of a chunk out of your day when you've got your practice to also do as well. Some ideas also for the practical side of running a social media account are that not only does it take up time to actually do your content, it also takes a tiny bit of work just to get the balance right in terms of how much content to put out there. So one really nice tip I like to give people is to give yourself maybe like
3 months or 6 months of a super basic content plan, which basically just means jotting down over a period of however many months what key dates you've got coming up. If you are a performer and it's coming up to World Theatre Day, if it is an illustration themed day or a fine art day, or it's during Freeze Week, etc. If it's World Dance Day, etc., you might want to just jot those into your calendar and think about what content you would like to share for that date. And it gives you a chance then to prepare something in advance without it being a huge hurry at the last minute. And it also means that you've taken the chance to think about how to populate those channels in a really manageable way, because there is so much going on when you're just out of college and you've got your practice, possibly another job, etc. You've got that moment and just to think, okay, I'm going to put something up on each channel once a day, once a week, making sure that they're not just left there languishing. Another little bit of advice is thinking about some good practice. If you're setting up a new channel for yourself as a professional creative and you're not quite sure where to start because it's different from the content you might be sharing on your personal channels, a few things that you might want to consider are things like behind the scenes. People love to see how work is created in any of the art forms. Whether that's your peers or whether it's people from outside of your industry. People also love to see teasers and work in progress to see how things are coming together. And that gives you a chance to build up some excitement. If you've got an expo coming up or a show coming up, it gives you a chance to tell people that you've got things coming without just keep on saying save the date to them. How-tos are sometimes quite nice. It doesn't relate to everybody and you might not feel like sharing all of that because it takes a little bit more of an investment in time, but they can be quite a nice way of attracting new people to your channel. Inspirations, sharing what inspires your practice, whether that's in a visual form or you talking to camera, is a really nice way of people getting to understand a little bit more about what's behind your work. And shout outs often to the creatives that you admire is a really nice way of building up a network and sharing again the kind of ecosystem that your work exists within. Another way of sharing your practice is on the documentation side. Some of the sort of time-lapse options that you have with videoing things is a great way to give people an insight into your rehearsal space, your studio, etc., without having to actually physically bring people in, and making sure that you do share your events, exhibitions, and a little bit just of who you are, because often if we're focused on showing the final product or showing the craft behind it, you've not given yourself a chance for people to really get to know you. So think about what aspects of your personal life or your personality that you might want to bring through on your channel.
Yeah, I think those are all really, really good tips. I personally love seeing like behind the scenes videos or seeing how things are made, and it really just makes you appreciate the craftsmanship and the creative process and the time that the artists kind of put into making things. Seeing a dance company in the studio working on doing some choreography, or seeing a potter kind of making something. Like, I love seeing that process, and that's not to say you have to do that, but it's quite a good way to engage an audience and to kind of have them invested in your work and your process. So I think that's really good to do. Just some other ideas for increasing your engagement with people. So you can use hashtags. I think across pretty much all of the platforms now. It kind of started on Twitter, and then it's got like Instagram is mostly where you would use them. I think that for Instagram there's a limit of 30 hashtags that you can use, but I think that the recommended is a maximum of 12. Otherwise your posts can be seen as kind of a bit spam-like, or if you're not kind of hashtagging relevant things, Instagram will penalise you in the algorithm. So I think 12 should be the maximum that you should use. You can also tag a location. So if your studio is in Nottingham, you could kind of tag the studio or tag the city, because then it'll show up in the feed for that particular area. You can also tag other accounts if they are relevant in the post. So if you are performing at a particular theatre, you might tag that theatre in the post, or if you're exhibiting in a gallery, you might tag that gallery, or if you're working with an organisation, or if you're funded by an organisation, you might want to tag them in the post. And one tip I would say for that is just make sure that it's relevant. You don't want to just tag lots and lots of people who perhaps don't have anything to do with the work in the post, because you don't want to kind of spam that organisation, and also Instagram may penalise you for kind of doing that where it's not relevant.
I think that's a really great point about thinking about how the algorithms work. We all know that it's a bit of a mystery, but one thing that does seem to be obvious at the moment is that it's really useful to pay attention to which tools each platform is really trying to promote at that time. So, for example, with Instagram, it was previously stories and IGTV, and they've just brought out Reels, which they're now heavily promoting. And that means that if you are producing content with that tool, it's much more likely to get seen. So if you can make those tools work to your advantage, that's a really good way of finding a little bit of extra exposure. As is also, if you ever get the opportunity to do a takeover of somebody else's channel or platform, it's a really nice way of putting your work out in front of a new audience or meeting a new network.
So I'm just going to show a couple of examples. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see them. And I've just got a few examples from artists' social media that I feel work really well. So all of these artists are alumni of UKNA artists. The first one I'm showing here is Jamal Sterrett, who is a dance artist. Jamal also works in photography and film. And the reason I wanted to show Jamal's profile is because his Instagram profile is like an art in itself. It's really curated. So as you can see, he kind of designs the profile so that his grid forms these patterns and kind of schedules the posts in a way that they kind of lead on, as you can see. And these are across different formats. So there's some videos, some Instagram TV, some photography. Jamal also does some brand collaborations, so some of these will be kind of in collaboration with different brands, and as you can see, the kind of images come together to form larger artworks within the Instagram grid, so that's a really nice example. The second one I'm going to show you is Jay Johnson. Jay is a musician. And the reason I wanted to show Jay's is because, well, the quality of the content is really nice. Jay has, again, a range of imagery, of videos, of music. He's a musician, so naturally some album kind of artwork. Again, some brand collaboration where he's kind of worked with fashion labels. And we mentioned a bit of kind of behind the scenes. I think what's really nice about Jay's is you see some kind of rehearsal footage, or you see him kind of coming up with a new riff, or working through some new lyrics. So there's kind of process in there, as well as some of the kind of more finished products. And what also I wanted to show with Jay's profile is Jay uses this URL bio. You can use other ones such as Linktree, there's some more. And what it allows you to do, because you can't actually have links on Instagram posts or within the captions, so with something like this, it allows you to kind of assign a link to a particular post so that people can kind of go to whatever it is you're talking about, whether that's a Spotify link or a website link or anything like that. So that's quite a handy tool. Another one I wanted to show, this is Instagram again. This is Ant Hamlin, who's a visual artist based in London and works across kind of kinetic sculpture and installation. So Ant's I wanted to show because he has quite a good range of content. So some of them are works installed in setting, some of them are kind of studio process, kind of making videos and testing. There's some kind of press shots of kind of interviews and things like that. He also participates in some artist talks on Instagram. So it's quite nice seeing kind of different areas. It's kind of Ant in his studio working on a piece, interviews, that sort of thing. And obviously Instagram is quite a good medium to showcase his work because it's very kind of visual based. And finally, over on Twitter, this is Ella Frears, who's a poet, works across visual arts as well. And being a poet, Twitter's quite a good platform for Ella. And in my understanding, there's quite a big community of writers and poets on Twitter. So this is quite a good community space for Ella to connect with people and to kind of have conversations. And it's not necessarily just about sharing her work, but about kind of engaging with people, talking about different things that are happening kind of in the literature community. This is a share of Ella's work by Florence and the Machine, which must have been an amazing feeling. I'm going to stop screen sharing now.
So networking is the word that I think probably gives everybody cold chills. It sounds absolutely horrifying, and I think we instantly are imagining kind of people in suits doing power handshakes, and sounds like the last thing you would ever want to get involved in. But in practice, in reality, I would actually think of it more as building a group of friends, acquaintances and supporters for you and for your work. So it's not as terrifying as it sounds, and it's actually, once you start it, a really enjoyable process. And the fantastic part about it for all of you listening is that you have already started on it. So your peer group in your discipline there, your technicians, your tutors, your lecturers are all part of your network, and they are going to be really vital people as you continue through your creative practice journey. I would definitely say stay in touch with people and support each other, be each other's cheerleaders, be the people who go to each other's events, who like each other's posts, who comment on things, who share things. Because one really key thing about networking is that it is just as much about thinking about how you can help other people along their creative journey as it is looking for opportunities for people to help you in return. There are tons of ways that you can start networking beyond your peer group, which would be things like especially going to events in your creative practice. So whether that's a private view, whether it's an expo, whether it's a fair, whether it is joining a peer crit group, whether it is, setting up a collaborative exhibition with some fellow graduates. There's lots of ways to keep reaching out, and that is really important because as much as there is some formal networking to be done in terms of going and cold introducing yourself to people, there's also tons of informal networking, which is literally having a chat with people over a drink at a private view, turning up to somebody's poetry reading and talking to them afterwards, or meeting fellow audience members. And actually, often those informal contacts will be just as important. It's often the way that, for example, if there's somebody putting an exhibition on, they will ask other artists, who do you know who's doing work on this kind of theme or in this discipline? If a promoter is looking to put on a night, they will often start by speaking to their friends and colleagues to get recommendations. So it's all just good practice to start now and think of everybody as part of your network. I think also remember that it is essentially a slow burn. You're looking at having a lifelong practice. So there's no huge rush to do it. You can think about building up slowly and surely. And there are lots of techniques to do that on the way, which means that you can pay a bit more attention as you go. Make sure that you do the basic things, like if somebody commissions you or asks you to come and perform somewhere or buys a piece of your work, make sure you keep in touch with them, do the sort of basic polite things like sending a thank you note, which often we forget about because it's such a rush when you're trying to get through everything. And keeping people updated with what you're up to. Although one quick point on that is, although it is brilliant, and I would definitely recommend having an email list for your contacts, do remember that the Data Protection Act applies to everybody. So you can only put somebody on your email list if they've requested it. So it would definitely be considered a spam if you just added somebody without asking their permission.
Yeah, so networking really is the kind of cornerstone of everything we do at UK New Artists. Our city takeovers, whilst they are an opportunity for artists to share their work with the public, really the most crucial part of those events is for artists to come together, to make friends, to to talk over breakfast, to attend events together, and to kind of build networks around the country and across different art forms. And one of the most amazing parts of our work is when we see artists who meet as part of one of our programs, and then they go on to collaborate and to make work together, or to start studios together, or put on an event, and to kind of see those friendships turn into professional relationships, or even just friendships. In fact, we have quite a few of our alumni who are like married now, who've met at one of our festivals and have a baby together. So yeah, that's like one of the most amazing parts. Actually, my partner and I met at one of the UK Young Artist Festivals. So yeah, it's just all about that kind of creating connections, and it makes us sound like a dating service now, doesn't it? But yeah, about collaborating and making friends as well, essentially. I know that 2020 has not been the best year for events and going to fairs and get-togethers and things, but one really good example is an organisation called In Good Company, who are a network of theatres and performance spaces. It started across the East Midlands, but it's pretty kind of nationwide now, and they run an artist development programme, and they have since March, I suppose, since lockdown, been doing these big Zoom get-togethers, and they're free and anybody can sign up to attend them. If you head to their Twitter, I think you can find the details, and that's just a chance for artists across lots of different disciplines to come together, to catch up, to talk about what's going on and how they can support each other. So whilst there may not be things happening in real life, there are plenty of things happening kind of over Zoom if you find the right places. Some other organisations that you could look to on social media for things like this are AN, Artist Newsletter, ArtQuest, UK New Artists, the Roundhouse perhaps. They have quite a good emerging artists network, and UK New Artists, of course. So yeah, always good to kind of connect with organisations that have networks of artists, because yeah, they may have things going on that you can get involved with, if not in real life, then digitally. I wanted to mention as well, you touched on artists supporting each other, which I think is a really good point, and sharing other people's successes, celebrating other people's work. One really good example from this year of that is the hashtag Artist Support Pledge, which was a kind of trend where artists would share their work with the Artist Support Pledge, work that was for sale, and I think it had a kind of limit on the price of the work. It was kind of affordable, I suppose. An artist would pledge that when they sold £1,000 worth of work, that they would buy work at the value of £200 from another artist. So it was a kind of chain going round where artists were selling their work to other artists, and also sharing and celebrating other people's work. So that was a really nice movement in 2020, where artists kind of came together as a network and supported each other.
Okay, so our final section is going to be on press and PR. And one recommendation I would make, even at this point when you're really starting out quite new in your career, is getting yourself set up for success for media relations. So you can already gather the materials that you'll need ready for when you have press opportunities, so that you're not scrambling at the last minute. So a great idea is to have all of the elements of your press pack ready to go. And most of them you will probably already have. It's just a case of getting them somewhere easily accessible and keeping them updated. So the key elements that you would want to find in that would be high-res images of your work, ideally covering a range of pieces, but making sure that anything which you think is particularly iconic or particularly encapsulates your practice is really well documented, either with photo or videos, or ideally both. And also, in absolutely the best circumstances, if you could get profile photos of yourself, whether it's one or two, like a headshot and a full-length portrait ready, especially if you can get that done by a friend, etc., who is really great at photography. It means that if somebody wants to do an interview or a feature, you're ready to go and you've already got everything they're going to ask for. Having your artist statement ready so that you've got your updated descriptor of what your practice is and what your work is all about. Your artist biography or CV, so that that's in a nice neat form and people can just run their eyes down it and see some of the major milestones of your career so far. And finally, if you've got something specific that you're promoting at the time, the press release. And it may be that once you are exhibiting with galleries or you're doing things through theatres or through dance spaces, the press side of things may well be taken care of by an in-house press person. But just in case at the start there's anything where you are self-organising something and you are responsible for doing the press for it, a really quick descriptor of what needs to go into a press release is thinking about the elements of who, what, why, where, and when. And it's as simple as that. You're trying to get over to a really busy journalist in the shortest amount of time, what's going on, why, where, and when, and then the key information in as succinct a way as possible of what makes it interesting or different, why they should cover it. So whether it is the first time you're performing, whether it is the biggest painting, whether it is, the most X or the least Y of any kind of criteria, if you can see them. It may not apply to absolutely everything, but if you can find out the points that make your work and your practice different, that is really helping a journalist to do their job. You also want to think about tailoring your messages. So if you are approaching some local media, you will want to be saying something slightly different from if you're going for a feature or an interview or a listings piece of coverage. So for local coverage, which is super helpful, really, really important, especially when you're starting out, you will want to be thinking about all the ways that your work relates to your local area. So if you've done something which is site specific, if you've trained in the area, if you grew up in the area, all of those links are really important for local media. Whereas if you are sending something for listings media, it's great if you can help the journalists by looking on their website and seeing how they would like that information presented. So often they will just want the absolute basics and they'll want it in a certain format of, when the dates are running, what the cost of entry is, etc. I would also say, in a super practical sense, when you're contacting the media, don't send large attachments. Often it's best not to even send anything as an attachment. If you're trying to send images or video, maybe send a web link or a WeTransfer or something so that you're not filling up their inboxes or often getting caught in their spam filters. And get to know your target media. So who is covering the area or the discipline that you're working in, and what sort of things are they writing about them? You can then maybe follow those journalists on Twitter or on Instagram, start to look at, if they're maybe saying on Twitter that they've got an opportunity to come up for profiles, then you could be the first person who's able to get in there with that opportunity and start to get a sense of what sort of things they're looking to cover. And that also applies for things like curators and promoters. If you start to work out who is working within the area that you want to get involved in, following them on social media and just engaging with them and starting to get to know them a little bit better, it means that you're setting yourself up for success.
I think that's a really good point about identifying kind of relevant people and who might be interested in your work. And I just thought it might be useful mentioning that there's a few different ways that you might approach the press. So as you're starting out in your career, this is likely to be more of a kind of personal approach. You might be identifying media and finding contacts from the website. So for example, you might be going to your local BBC radio station and looking up the presenters, figuring out which presenter might be the most interested in your work or whose kind of segment is the most relevant for your work. And you might want to start your own kind of spreadsheet for your kind of press contacts that you update and add to. As you kind of get a bit further along, you might want to work with a freelance PR person like Anna, or with an agency or a company who can kind of do some of that work for you and really tailor their approach. And obviously they come with their own contacts within the industry. There's also some services that you can use like Arts Media Contacts, which is a big database. You do have to pay a kind of subscription to it, but there's a web system which has kind of every media contact, I suppose, in the country, and those might be arts focused or more general. They might be local or national, different kind of niche subject areas. So you could use something like that if you wanted to do the press yourself, but you perhaps didn't want to do the legwork of finding the contacts. And you can also write your press releases within that, I think, and distribute it from within the system, I think. I'm looking at
it. Yeah, from what I remember, yeah. Sounds right.
So yeah, just to highlight, there are some different ways that you can approach press. I'm going to just quickly show some examples of some of the things that Anna has talked about. I'll share my screen again. So here I have an example of a press pack. So this is a press pack that UK New Artists put together for our Robert Walters Group UK Young Artist of the Year Award, which happens yearly. It took a hiatus this year, but happens yearly at the Saatchi Gallery. So this press pack had a link to where all of the images could be found and downloaded. It had some background information about the award, the curator, included information about the judges, who the shortlisted artists are or were. And then we had a kind of profile on each of the shortlisted artists. So there were 10 finalists for the award. So we had a headshot of the artist, some basic information, kind of where they're from, where they studied, some images of the work that had been selected for the exhibition, the artist's biography, and then a statement about the work and a quote from the artist. So this, if you were, this might be about different pieces of your work, or if you were kind of part of an exhibition, it might be different works within the exhibition. So yeah, this is just some basic information, and then, like I said, we had the link to where all of these images could be downloaded. An example of a press release. So this is a press release from our last city takeover in Nottingham in 2019. So just obviously headline, kind of key messages, key information, basic information about the event, some images, making sure that they're credited to the artists. And then just some kind of highlights, key information, a few artists, and as Anna mentioned, we would kind of tailor our press release based on the kind of where we were targeting. So this one was targeted to local media. So the quote that we included alongside the director of UK Young Artists, as we were called at the time, we included a quote from Nottingham City Council because we were kind of targeting Nottingham press. Whereas if we were going for a more arts focused media agency, we probably would have included a quote from the Arts Council instead of a kind of local city council leader. Then at the end, we've got some kind of social links, information, and our boilerplate, which is the kind of standard bit that we'd have on the bottom of all of our press releases that acknowledges any funders or people that we need to thank. Just one other thing that I've put in here to quickly mention is a social media toolkit. So we would do one of these when we've got a big event, and we would send them to press or partners or people who are involved, and include some kind of suggested tweets or Facebook posts with links, any hashtags that we might be using, suggested copy for online stories, and kind of images, press release, that sort of thing. So that's quite handy if you want to kind of generate a bit of buzz around a project that you're doing, or an exhibition or a launch. You can kind of save people time, I suppose, by suggesting some things for them, which then they're maybe more likely to get involved in your campaign. I've also just included some images which I'll quickly go through, some nice images for press. So this is Connor Rogers. These images are taken by Rhys Straw, and they were taken at the Robert Walters Group UK Artist of the Year Award, which I mentioned. So this is a really lovely headshot of Connor standing in front of his work. As you can see, the quality is really nice. And then I've just included a couple of different images of Connor's work to show. I mean, this one shows the work in its entirety. And then for Connor's work, because it's quite intricate painting, it's quite nice to have a close-up so you can really see the kind of quality and detail of the work. This image I've included because it shows the scale of the work. We've got some people in the shot. Those don't have to be people, but it kind of gives you a sense of scale. Again, this image shows the work in its entirety, but it's quite difficult to know the size of this. So this is actually something like 300 plastic baggies stitched together and then painted on. You can see then a close-up with some of the detail of the painting. And then this image, again, gives a sense of the scale. And then here's an installation shot where you can see those two pieces of work side by side. So quite nice to have a bit of a variety in your imagery that can be used. Just to give a couple of examples, this is What Is Written Performance Company. They're a dance company. These images are taken by Matt Corey at our last city takeover in Nottingham. If you're a performance company, I'd always recommend trying to have a short video trailer, even just kind of 1 minute clip of your work. But obviously you want imagery as well. And these, I think, are really good examples of imagery that kind of capture the motion and the energy and the quality of this work.
So, especially if it's your first time getting a chance to appear in the media, sometimes you might be feeling slightly self-conscious about it, slightly worried about how it will go. So some really lovely tips that I would suggest would be, firstly, that you can always ask whether you can have the questions in advance. They may not be able to give them because they might be doing it on the fly as they do the interview, but it's always worth asking if you want to have that time to prepare. Also, just regardless of what the questions are, have a think about what the key points are that you want to say, what message that you want to get out of this interview. And I would suggest keeping that to probably no more than 3, ideally, because it's so hard to remember when you're busy in the flow of things answering questions. But if there are some crucial elements that you want to make sure come across, for example, the name and venue of where you're doing your exhibition or your performance, and any key aspects of your work that you would be really keen to get mentioned. And possibly do those in order of importance. So, for example, making sure that your name and the performance and the venue are listed, and then making sure, if you can, to weave in your next points. Secondly, also, if you're in there doing the interview and feeling slightly bamboozled by a question, a really simple tip is just to take a breath before you answer the question. It gives you just a second to collect your thoughts before you go into it. And finally, if you are feeling torn when you have the opportunity to engage with the media and thinking, oh, perhaps I don't want to, I don't feel ready, or I'm feeling self-conscious about it, which is totally understandable. One really great way that I would suggest getting yourself into the mind frame for doing that is imagining that your work and your practice is someone that you really love and really care about, like a best friend, and that you would do anything to promote and to put into a good light. So you can give yourself that slight bit of distance between, you and your private life, and you and your practice, and who you are in your professional life, and go out and give it the glow up that it deserves. One last point on writing a press release is it's useful to think about structuring your press release like a news article. So in the same way that in the news you would see a headline and then your stand first and then the details, you can structure your press release in the same way. So what's your headline piece of information, the main excitement that you're trying to convey with somebody, then a collated bit of all the key details, and then further down paragraphs on each of the elements of it.
So we're going to finish with just a parting tip from each of us. So from me, I guess my advice would be to always consider your audience. Think about who it is that you're communicating with, who you want to engage with, and have them in mind when you are writing something or designing something. So just for example, if you are writing about your practice and you want a curator to be kind of reading it, think about your language and the way that you're writing about your work. And then you might be writing quite differently if you are trying to get the public to come and see one of your shows or to come and visit your work. You might change your kind of language and your messaging and your tone of voice perhaps to kind of talk to different audiences, and that goes for social media or for your artist statement, or if you are applying for an opportunity or an exhibition or something. So yeah, my tip would always be think about who you want to be reading this and tailor your message accordingly.
Fantastic, that's such a lovely tip. Really agree with all of that. My final tip would be to think about the long term and have a think about, in your wildest dreams, what would success look like? Where would you like to be in 5, 10, 20 years time? And give yourself a chance to think about what it would take to get there. What kind of press coverage would you like to see? How would you like to see yourself interacting with people on social media? And use that as a way of building backwards to see what it is that you need to get to where your end step is, and really give yourself the chance to have the confidence that you will be able to achieve it and be able to really visualize yourself getting there.
Amazing. I think that's a brilliant tip, and I imagine that that's something that an artist would think about in terms of their practice. You know, where do I want to be in 5 years? So it's quite nice to think about that in line with your kind of profile, your social media, your website, your kind of online presence, to think about them hand in hand. So I think that's really nice. So I hope this has been helpful. Hopefully it has given you some kind of foundations and knowledge for how you can make a start. I know that it can perhaps be quite scary when you're starting out. You know, you're an artist and you want to be an artist and you want to make work and you want to share work, but you kind of quickly discover that you also have to be your own marketing manager and business manager and accountant and all of these other things. So hopefully this kind of gives you a bit of a kickstart into how you might approach some of these things, and know that you don't need to be an expert on everything straight away, and it'll take a bit of time to experiment and to find, you know, what works for you. So good luck with all of it, and thank you for tuning in, for listening. I'd like to thank Anna for joining us for this talk. I'd also like to thank the Arts Council for their continued support of UK New Artists, and our 4 university partners, which are Nottingham Trent University, De Montfort University, the University of Derby and the University of Lincoln, for their continued support. Thank you very much.